Hello and welcome to another episode of Something Rhymes with Purple with me, Susie Dent, and my co-host,
Gyles Brandreth. Happy St. Patrick's Day. If you're listening to this on Tuesday the 17th of March, it is St. Patrick's Day, not just here, but all over the world. If you're listening at a later date, I hope you enjoyed St. Patrick's Day. And if you have eyes, maybe they're Irish eyes, and perhaps today they're smiling.
Oh, Jazz, you know what? It's also a special day for us too.
Is it?
Because this is our 50th episode.
50 podcasts with you, Susie.
50 not out.
Well, that's lovely. So familiarity doesn't breed contempt.
Well, we may be out after this because my Irish accent's coming up.
Do we know who St. Patrick was? He's the patron saint of Ireland. We celebrate his day all over the world. In London, there is now a St. Patrick's Day parade. I know to my cost because last year, St. Patrick's Day fell on a Sunday. And it was a Sunday when I was hosting a wonderful event that took place at the Theatre Royal Haymarket in London, where the great Dame Judi Dench came to the theatre to have a conversation with me and to perform in a show that has in fact since grown and developed, and in fact is about to open on the 20th of this month at the Bridge Theatre in London. It's a celebration of Dame Judi Dench, her life, her career. She is the most amazing phenomenon you can imagine. 85 is the new 45 as far as she's concerned. She's just wonderful. But last St. Patrick's Day, we were due to do this at the Theatre Royal. And Judi Dench arrived in London by car and found that West End had been closed off. So she couldn't get anywhere near the theatre. So from the car she was in, she texted me to say, they're dropping me off somewhere in Soho. Can you meet me?
Soho.
So Soho, I set off for Soho.
That actually
Anyway.
links to the etymology of Soho because it used to be a hunting cry.
Oh.
Yes,
Oh,
there
as
were
in,
hunting fields
as in
behind
Tally-ho.
Soho. Yeah, Soho. Anyway, carry on.
Well, that's interesting. We've already learned something. So in Soho,
Yeah.
I found myself literally outside a strip club. As Judi Dench's car came along, I thought this is the most inappropriate place to be meeting Judi Dench outside a strip club. Then I remembered she had actually been in a film about the Windmill Theatre. We Never Closed. Do you remember that Windmill Theatre where they did strip shows for many years?
Oh, right, no.
During the Second World War, they never closed, and the artistes never clothed. Anyway, that's near where we stopped, so I thought, well, I suppose that's all right. But literally, it was raining, and then hailstones. So this lady, this great distinguished dame, gets out of her car, aged 84. I'm there with a tattered umbrella, saying, I'm so sorry, you're outside a strip club, and hailstones are pouring. And she says, oh, what fun. And we then walked through Soho. Every other person stopped her for a selfie. She agreed to every selfie. She fell about laughing. She thought it was the most hilarious thing you could imagine.
Oh.
Isn't that the attitude to have?
She is totally amazing.
She is
I lived in
totally-
Soho for a very long time. I think it's one of the most wonderful places
where did you
ever.
live?
I lived on Broadwick Street, on the corner of Broadwick and Berwick Street. So I overlooked the market.
And that really is very near where all these sort of sleazy places were.
Well, yeah.
I mean, maybe they
there
aren't
were a few,
anymore.
Soho's, well, it's always been an amazing place. It's becoming a little bit gentrified, which is not to everyone's taste. I remember my mum being a little bit worried when I moved in there because of the associations with Soho. But actually, I felt safer than I probably ever felt anywhere. in Soho.
I'm right in thinking there are still a lot of strip clubs there.
Well, yeah,
I feel there are. I, of course,
there's
avert.
fantastic places, Raymond's Review Bar, and
Yeah, but that was a sort of strip
it probably
club.
was now, but now it's more kind of drag and it's great. They have great shows there.
And because, as you know, I know everybody. I first went to Raymond's Review Bar with Paul Raymond. He
Yes.
was an unusual person. He was the first. His was the first Rolls Royce I'd ever sat in. He offered me a lift. We did a radio program, and I met him. This is the 1970s. And he offered me a lift in his Rolls Royce.
This was around the time that Richard Branson gave you the two-finger salute
no.
from his roles.
No.
No, okay. I've
That
misremembered that story.
came many years later.
Okay.
But he ran a lot of strip clubs, and he had sort of magazines with naked people in them.
Yeah.
He owned. His fortune was made by owning a lot of property in Soho. But what you're telling us is that Soho has changed. There may still be strip clubs there.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
But there's everything there. There's wonderful restaurants. There's a lovely church there.
Yes,
Soho Square has got two beautiful churches, an old French
Amazing
church
churches.
and a remarkable Catholic church, I think.
and it's just beautiful around there. I should know.
Well, never mind that. We're
No.
moving out of Soho. We're moving
Yes.
to the Emerald Isle of Ireland.
We are, and
Irish Isles are smiling. Do you have Irish relatives?
I don't. I'm often asked if I do because I have blue eyes and dark hair. But as far as I know,
And you're wearing green today.
And I'm wearing green in honour of St Patrick's Day. One of my best, most memorable holidays was going to the west coast of Ireland in Connemara, the sort of wild landscape of Connemara. It's just like a lunar landscape. It's absolutely beautiful. I love Dublin. I haven't travelled enough. I need to travel some more.
You do. I love all of Ireland. I love Northern Ireland, Belfast.
Oh, Belfast is beautiful.
Absolutely.
I went there for the first time last year.
If you go to Belfast and you've not been before, do go to the old Belfast City Library. It's one of the oldest and most interesting libraries I've ever been to. I go to Dublin a lot because I'm president of the Oscar Wilde Society. And Oscar Wilde, of course, was born and brought up in Dublin. And I go down to Cork. My wife's family comes from Cork. And most of her great aunties have now passed away. She had a lot of great aunties who were nuns. So they don't have descendants. So the family has rather disappeared.
Okay, yeah.
But Ireland has contributed to our language. Some of the greatest writers from the British Isles, I mentioned Oscar Wilde, some of the wittiest writers, some of the most brilliant writers. You think of James Joyce, who was Irish, Samuel Beckett, who went to live in France and wrote in French, but he, of course, was Irish. Went, incidentally, Samuel Beckett, to the same school as Oscar Wilde. They were both Irish, came from Protestant families. Richard Brinsley Sheridan, perhaps one of the 5 wittiest playwrights ever to emerge from the British Isles, came from Ireland. So it's given us language and literature. Has it given us individual words, phrases?
Yes, it has. I mean, most of us will know the sort of most obvious ones like banshee or shamrock. They have their origins in Irish.
What is a banshee?
A supernatural being supposed, this is from the OEDs, this is historical dictionary. Supernatural being supposed by the peasantry of Ireland and the Scottish Highlands to wail under the windows of the house where one of the inmates is about to die. Certain families of rank were reputed to have a special family spirit of this kind. It's a bit like is that a will-o'-the-wisp? What else is it that if you see it, you're likely to die? A harbinger of death. The various sprites and mischievous.
I don't know. Somebody sneezing, wheezing, and getting very hot on the underground.
So the oldest borrowing, we think, from Irish into English is the word mind. So we get the word mind from
forgive me.
The Irish.
I'm so sorry. These are words that were Irish. There's an Irish language. Maybe we should actually start with the Irish language.
Okay.
So banshee is an Irish language word. It's not just a word in English used in Ireland that we've adopted.
No.
Explain to us about the Irish language.
So these came over to us from the Irish language. And some of them are very unlikely. And you will know some of them, but I'm guessing that you may not know that they come from.
Can I ask you something, first of all? You may not know the answer to this. Was there an Irish language spoken in Ireland before they spoke English?
So yes, words like banshee or shamrock, they have their origins in Irish. And Irish was the Celtic language also known as Gaelic. Okay, so that's still spoken in parts of Ireland known as the Gaeltacht. But most recognisable Irish words that you will find in English have obvious connections to Ireland. But there are some that I think will surprise you. And I'm going to start with one because it's very close to your heart. Being a minister from this party of old, Tory.
Oh.
Yes. Tory is a really roundabout story that leads from Ireland to the nickname of, I guess, now the party in government, the Tory party, because it's apparently, now you can tell me how to spell this with your ancestry. It's because I have to say, big disclaimer here, I often get lovely emails, but teasing emails from Countdown viewers saying your Irish is appalling. And it is, because I don't know how to pronounce these words properly, having never properly studied the Irish language, which is a big omission on my part. So it's apparently a respelling of the Irish Toraid, which is Toraidhe. And they were bandits. So they were Irish bandits originally. You're not going to like where this is going. And the word was picked up and used for outlaws as far afield as, India even, and Scotland. So a Toraid was an outlaw. It was somebody who existed outside the confines of the law. And then during something called the Exclusion Crisis of the 17th century, those who wanted to disinherit the Catholic heir to the British throne, who were Whigs or exclusionists, used Tory as a disparaging nickname for their opponents. And then, as so often, a word that's used against a particular group of people then gets picked up by that group of people and embraced and then switched and repurposed. And then they decided to use it of themselves. It's a bit like the Cavaliers and the Roundheads. They began as insults towards each other, and they thought, oh, quite like that.
Well, I never knew that. So
Yeah.
Tory is
an
actually
Irish
an
word.
Irish word. I know one that I think
Okay.
is extraordinary. See if you know this already. I think I'm right in saying that clock, as in the clock that tells you the time, is originally an Irish word. I think it can be traced through Dutch, French, medieval Latin, right the way
Cloche,
back
yeah.
to the Celtic word clagan or clacker, both meaning bell. Do you think that's possible?
Well, yes, it's definitely all to do with bells. So a cloche hat looks like a bell. Cloche and clock are siblings, and clocks, of course, had bells attached. Cloak also, because cloaks were bell-shaped. So lots of unlikely siblings from clock, and it definitely does go back to a bell. If it comes from Irish, then that's brilliant.
Here's a much more modern one that I thought was American but turns out to be Irish. Dig. Not as in, digging up, digging your grave, but as in, I dig this, I get this, I understand this, to dig something. I appreciate, I understand, It's widely accepted now as having come from the Irish language. I thought it was just like an American slang expression, specifically from the Irish verb twig, T-U-I-G, meaning to understand.
Yes.
Did you know
I have
that?
heard that twig. Yes, I have definitely heard that. And it's very often for linguists, there are what we call cognates. So that means a sort of sister or brother or, some member of the same family that you will then get in other languages. And it's quite tricky to determine exactly, from centuries ago, which came first and which was the kind of the Ur ancestor of everything. Quite often it goes back to the ancient language known as Proto-Indo-European. And then, that's quite, you just say, it goes back to that ancient language. Something came to mind. Oh, yes, the dig. This is going completely off point, but we quite like our little ramblings on this podcast. But digs, as in accommodation. Do you know where that comes from?
Oh.
That's not Irish.
Diggings, where you dig yourself in to sleep the night.
And do you know where they originated?
No.
During the California Gold Rush, where prospectors fled to California, obviously, to try and be part of this
They didn't flee, they
discovery.
rushed.
Well, they rushed, exactly. And basically, entire towns had to be dug up around the mines to cater for the miners, to give them entertainment, food, accommodation, etc. And it's from those diggings that we get the idea of. It's a bit old-fashioned now. There's a Carnaby Street ring to it, doesn't it? The digs.
I want to talk about whiskey galore. First of all,
yes.
explain
Water
to me
of life.
why whiskey in Scottish is without an E and whiskey in Irish is with an E. Have I got it the right way round?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, they're just variants of each other. You'll find those variants throughout the world when they're talking about whiskey. So
Just because there was no standard orthography
Yes.
until the 18th century.
Well, yes, and dialect, etc., plays a role too.
Though Irish
spelling
whiskey is
still...
always with an E and Scots whiskey is always without an
Are
E.
you a whiskey aficionado?
No.
Okay.
I don't drink alcohol, never did.
Oh, no, you don't
but
do
I
it.
said whiskey galore because that was a wonderful film based on a wonderful novel by Compton Mackenzie. Galore is directly
That's
taken from
Irish,
a Gaelic... Yeah,
isn't it?
exactly,
Yes,
a Gaelic
yes.
phrase. Go leor, spelt G-O, new word L-E-O-R, which translates as till plenty. Galore, plenty.
Nice, I like that.
Yeah.
What about trousers? We've talked before about all the euphemisms for trousers on here, haven't we?
trousers.
Do you remember Inexpressibles?
Oh, yes. I
Remember
love
this?
that. Yes.
Well, that was in Victorian times when the word trousers could not be used, and they came up with all these amazing euphemisms: round me houses, sit-upons, inexpressibles. But trousers itself is a borrowing of the Irish and Scottish Gaelic. Now, again, accent, pronunciation, apologies. Trubas, I think. Triubhas. Our listeners will be laughing their heads off at that, but please let me know how you should pronounce it. But yes, Triubhas.
And what did that word mean?
And it meant a single leg at that point, which is why we talk about a pair of trousers, because it was originally a single leg that was attached by a kind of breeches type garment at the top. So yes, two single legs that you would attach to a sort of girdle, men too. So yeah, that's trousers for you. Slob is another one.
Slob?
Yes. That seems to come from the Irish slab, which actually first meant mud, but then developed the kind of sense of a lazy, slovenly person. We're all slobs sometimes. But yeah, I like galore. That's nice on Puss as well, because Pussy Galore is what I immediately thought of when you said galore, because I'm listening to Martin Jarvis's and Ros Ayres' fantastic dramatisations of the James Bond novels.
Oh, they're marvellous,
They are
aren't they?
amazing.
You know
Pussy
that
Galore is in Yes.
Martin Jarvis told me that one of the things that they have to do with these Ian Fleming, I think they've done a lot of them now,
Yes.
the Ian Fleming novels, and they have the young Stevens plays...
Toby
Stevens plays James Bond.
Yes.
And is wonderful. And Martin Jarvis, I think, does the adaptations himself from the novels.
Yes.
And they have to really work on the political correctness now, because these novels,
course.
written in the 1950s, are full of sexism and occasional casual racism.
But because you have to keep names like Pussy Galore, I mean, there's still a fair amount of sexism in there, I have to say. But with our modern hats on, we kind of could judge them in different ways, I suppose.
Go into puss?
But puss, yes, not the synonym for cat or the term for parts of your body, but it comes from the Irish puss, P-U-S, and it travelled very quickly to the US, so we actually owe... Well, actually, do we use that for a face anymore? I'm not
yes,
sure.
Look at the puss on you. Look at the puss on her. Oh, yes, people do say that.
So we be careful with that last one. Okay.
Well, that's
sourpuss. We have sourpuss and glamourpuss.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Shut your gob.
Gob. Is that Irish gob?
Well, apparently gob is Irish.
Gobsmacks.
I mean, the English adopted gob, it's one of our expressions from the word mouth, isn't it? But apparently it comes from the Gaelic word for beak, as in a bird's beak. So, and it's got the same meaning in Scottish Gaelic. I think Scottish Gaelic and Irish Gaelic are related in some way, aren't they?
Yes, they absolutely are. It's fascinating, this. I'm just looking here to see which other Irish loanwords came into English, because, of course, during the apex of kind of Irish imports was during the 19th century, I think, which was mass emigration, and Irish immigrants streamed to the UK and to North America, and they took, of course, their vocabularies with them, which is how things then spread around the world.
I think I've discovered the oldest expression now in the English language to come from Gaelic originally, beyond the pale.
Oh, yes.
It's used, obviously, to describe people's outrageous behaviour. And I believe it originated in Ireland way back in the 14th century, because the pale was the area of Ireland under heavy British control even then.
Yes.
And people living in areas outside of this were considered wild and outlandish. They were beyond the pale.
Yes.
Is that an urban myth, or is that...
Well, no. Pale actually existed before the Irish pale, but it was probably the Irish pale that kind of popularised the expression. But yes, it's linked to palisade and palisade. So it's meant to stick, a palum in Latin, a stick. So these were the boundaries, really, as you say, beyond which the heathens, which of course comes from people who lived on the heath, the peasants, they were over there where everything had gone to the dogs. That's another expression that kind of, that came from that axis of people who are urbane and live in urban environments, and those who are peasants and live beyond.
Gone to the dogs, they live with the wild dogs?
They live with the wild dogs, yes. So things were thrown to the dogs, such as, yes, the wildness, the kind of the feral people who kind of lived beyond there with the canine inhabitants.
Oh, there's so many more words to celebrate here on St. Patrick's Day. Boycott, brogues. But we better take a break first. Shall we have some whiskey? A wee dram of whiskey?
I'm not a whiskey fan.
No, nor am I. But if we did, it'd be with an E.
Okay.
Irish whiskey for us today. This is our St. Patrick's Day celebration of language, particularly language that has an Irish origin. You'll be relieved to know that neither Susie nor I are attempting to do it in our Irish accents. I used to know, when I was an MP, the Reverend Ian Paisley, who was a much milder and more delightful person in the flesh than sometimes he appeared when you saw him on television. And when I was with him, I used to sort of develop a sort of Irish accent. So I began, you talk with Dr. Paisley and you become all a bit like that. But I know that one should not do that sort of thing now, so I avoid it like the plague. People talk about Paisleyites. People sometimes actually had such reservations about Dr. Paisley, they would boycott him. Boycott is a word Irish in origin, isn't it? What is the origin of boycott?
Yes, it is. So this is an eponym, and it goes back to Charles Cunningham Boycott, who worked as a land agent for a landowner in County Mayo, essentially. So this is looking back to towards the middle of the 19th century. There was a group of activists called the Irish National Land League, and they, quite understandably, in response to evictions from the state, all sorts of kind of measures to reduce money and to increase rents. So the landowner was trying to impose quite hefty hikes on rents from the people who worked from him. The Irish National Land League just basically encouraged the workers to withdraw their labour and begin this campaign of ostracism, essentially, towards Boycott, who was representing the landowner. And it included, I mean, it was fairly drastic. So it included shops so that Boycott and his family couldn't actually get any food. I think he had to send his wife and daughters away because, you know, things became incredibly hard. But the word really was propelled into the mainstream by a letter that Boycott wrote to the Times. And he essentially talked about his predicament, and the Times saw it as a kind of victimization of a peer of the realm or a servant of the peer of the realm. And so there were two very, very kind of extreme views coexisting here. And you can actually see the sides of both of them, really. You know, one who was really suffering and could see his family suffering because he couldn't get anything done. He couldn't find any food. And the others because literally they were living on the breadline. So really tricky. But that was what gave us the word boycott today. And it's amazing it's endured for, almost 2 centuries now.
Names are interesting. A lot of Irish people have names beginning with MAC, as in, there was a wonderful actor who I knew called Michael McLearmore. That wasn't his real name at all. He didn't come from Ireland. He invented himself as a great Irish phenomenon.
Oh, is that Macklemore for us?
And he called himself Michael spelt in a funny way, and McLearmore. But Mac is a prefix meaning, does it mean son of or grandson of?
Yes, it's patronymic, isn't it? So
I think it means son of, Mac. And O means grandson of, as in O'Grady, O'Brien.
Yeah.
O'Halloran.
Yeah. But not O'Murphy.
No.
There's Murphy and there's Kelly, isn't there? Quite popular surnames.
One talks about an accent as a brogue. He's got an Irish brogue, a strong Irish brogue. It also, of course, brogues are shoes. And I think brogue is a word of Irish origin because the perforations in brogues, well, brogue, the Irish word, perforations, allowed for drainage of rain and bog water. And they were generally worn for everyday use rather than on special occasions. Those were your brogues. And so the brogue, the fashion in shoes that are brogues, comes directly from the Irish word for shoe, brogue.
Yes. And if you've got a distinct brogue, distinct accent, then we think that comes from the typical patter of people who wore brogues. You know, if you say, he's got a distinct Irish brogue.
Yes.
Yes. We think that sense of brogue is linked to the shoe sense of brogue because the wearers of those shoes were the ones who delivered the patter.
If you are Irish and listening to this and think, God, these people are talking a load of cobblers.
Which I think we are today.
Please feel free to get in touch and tell us that, or indeed put any queries our way, and we'll do our best to do some research and give you the answers. You can communicate with us, purple@somethingelse.com. Have we had any...
I have just decided, as I get older, I've decided that when I don't know the answer to something, there's no point in waffling, although probably listeners will say today I've been waffling. But I have to say this is not a subject that I know masses about, and I'm so embarrassed by that fact that I'm actually going to go and prep a lot about this for maybe for the next season of Countdown, because I think it's a fascinating subject.
Or indeed for our podcast a year from now on St. Patrick's Day next year.
I'll bring the Jen.
If we survive that long.
I will.
Chloe Debussy has written to us. Dear Susie, dear Gyles, first let me tell you how much I enjoy your podcast, being a logophile myself.
Oh.
This morning, 4 a.m., I couldn't sleep and thought of a word game to play. I don't know if Gyles has mentioned it yet. Apologies if you have. I was trying to come up with words with the most number of the same letter in it, going alphabetically. Oh, I love the idea of this game. A, abracadabra.
Abracadabra.
Yeah, a magic. Has that been a magic spell for a long time?
Yes, centuries. And it was always portrayed in a kind of triangular shape. So it was a, and then abba, and then it would always kind of go like that. And it became a sort of talisman that you would wear to ward off evil.
Abracadabra. People of my generation, izzy wizzy, let's get busy. That was our magic phrase.
Okay.
B. Can you think of a word with more than one B in it? Oh yes.
B.
Bubble. She's come up with baobab. The 3 B's. What's baobab?
It's a tree.
Oh, is it? A baobab
tree.
I like her one for C. Cockcrow.
Oh, that's good.
That's right. Would cockroaches be even more? No. Doddled for D. Four with... Oh, this is wonderful. I love... She's got 4 E's in her next word. A word with 4 E's in it.
This
is so good. Wee. We. Actually,
Okay.
She does this at 4 a.m. I have to say, if I got down to that, I'd be needing to get up at 4 a.m.
I like kerfuffle for the next one. With Fs.
Kerfuffle. That's quite good. Riff-raff.
Yes.
Is not a bad one. Anyway, it's a fun game to play, and if you do suffer from insomnia and wake at 4 a.m, you can listen to one of these podcasts, or you can play a game like that. Thank you very much, Chloe, who got in touch from France.
Oh, fantastic. I've got something from Eleanor. I'm not sure where Eleanor comes from, but she's a long-time listener, first-time caller, she says. One of her favourite phrases is to get the raw end of the stick, or the more common version, she believes, is to get the wrong end of the stick. Do we know where this comes from? Well, there is a story, isn't there? Do you know this about in Roman times? That basically in public urinals and public loos, which incidentally used to have the most filthy graffiti on their walls. But anyway, there would be a sponge essentially at the end of a stick with which you would wipe your wherewithal. And so the story goes, if you actually picked up the wrong end, then you'd get stuff all over your hands. Not very nice. Definitely need hand gel for that one. So that's one story, which I think is very unlikely, but it is quite colourful. I think the idea is simply that, yes, if you get the muddy end of the stick, or worse, of any stick that you might pick up on a country lane, then you picked up the wrong one. I think it's a very simple metaphor, but you might prefer the Roman version.
Somebody called Jerry has written to ask about who or whom, when we should use the word who, when you should use the word whom. Jerry, believes that you use who when you are referring to the subject of a clause, and whom when you are referring to the object. Is that correct?
Yes, pretty much, actually. So the person to whom I lent my book, and to is the preposition, and whom is the object of that preposition. So yes, that is broadly correct.
I've got a book called...
People don't tend to stick to it these days, though.
Yeah, that's the trouble. I've got a tip from a book called Grammar Girl's Quick and Dirty Tips for Better Writing, and it's to use the word him as a test. If you could answer the question with him, it needs to be whom. Do you get it?
Well, because you wouldn't say the person to him I lent my book. Or I guess they're not what
if it's him, if the
saying.
answer is him, I lent it to him.
Oh, I see the answer. Oh, yes, okay.
That's quite a clever way of doing it.
Neat, yeah.
You know, my son Bennett, he's written a children's story, because he's got some young children, in which there's a very sophisticated grammarian who is the owl in the story,
nice. I like that.
whose cry is, to it, to whom?
That's brilliant. Oh, I love that.
Susie, we can't go. We can't leave St. Patrick's Day without 3 of your words, your trio, and they don't need to be Irish.
No. Okay. No, they're probably not going to be Irish, actually, which is a bit of an omission.
No, but
and
we're
that's
inclusive.
One thing.
We're inclusive.
We are inclusive, but it would be great to hear our listeners' favourite Irish words, wouldn't it? So please do send them in. We'd love to hear them. Well, this is just something, I never knew there was a word for this, but I have discovered there is a half pace. What a half pace is?
No, what is a half pace?
A half pace is a landing, but not any old landing. It's a small landing at the top of a set of stairs where you have to turn and take another flight of stairs up. So it's not a landing that you would kind of, dither or linger on.
A half
pace. It's a half pace. I
That's
really like
very
that.
good.
Yes, that's your half pace. My next one is, I thought because, things around us aren't absolutely fantastic at the moment. The world is not in the best place, is it? I thought I'd give you some of my favourite words just to indulge in a little bit. Riparian. I like riparian. Riparian means by the bank of a stream where you might gongoozle and find tranquility.
Speaking
Riparian.
of gongoozle, that's a word in our mug.
Yes.
We have a mug. We should have mentioned this the other day when we were doing our special programme about branding.
Yes.
We have a Something Rhymes with Purple mug.
Yes.
And it's got all our branding on the outside, but inside it's got the word gongoozle with the definition. When you've finished your tea, it tells you what to gongoozle is. And how do they get hold of it?
purple.backstreetmerch.com. I think that's it. purple.backstreetmerch.com.
Sounds as if it's some place in Soho, doesn't it? Get to backstreetmerch.com. Anyway, so that was your second word.
That was
What's
my
your
second.
third?
My last one is, as I say, we find ourselves in a slightly sticky situation in the world at the moment, but this is a nice way of putting it. It's an imbroglio. just because it sounds beautiful.
And is that how you pronounce it? It's spelled imbroglio, isn't it?
It is.
But is that not correct?
It's a complicated situation. Imbroglio. It's Italian. Imbroglio.
Imbroglio.
Yes.
Imbrogglio. And what does it mean?
It means, it can mean a sort of fisticuff type situation, but generally just a complicated, knotty situation.
The world is in an imbroglio.
Yes.
The world is in a terrible state of chassis. That's a line from the great Sean O'Casey.
Oh, okay.
A wonderful Irish playwright. My quotation of the week is from another great Irish playwright, George Bernard Shaw, who lived into his 90s, was a remarkable man. He was photographed up a tree, still pruning the tree in his 90s. In fact, I think he fell off the ladder, which caused his death. But by then, he had written all those amazing plays.
Really? Is that how he died?
Yeah, as a result of...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in his 90s.
Nice way to go.
Good man, a vegetarian. Proof that you can live into your 90s even as a vegetarian. And he also, sometimes people say to me, Gyles, what are this playing around with Susie on a weekly basis, just chatting about words? And I say, actually, we like to be, childlike now and again. Not childish necessarily. Well, I can be a bit childish. She's never childish. But it's a good thing to play. And this is a line, my quote of the week is from George Bernard Shaw. We don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's it for this week. Join us again next Tuesday or at any time. If you enjoyed it, give us a nice review. Recommend us to a friend. If you've got a question you want to get in touch, purple@somethingelse.com. Something rhymes with purple. That's us. It's a Somethin Else production produced by Lawrence Bassett with additional production from Paul Smith. We love him. Steve Ackerman, Grace Laker and Gully.
That was my line. Shut your gob.